Hi, today I would like to talk about the relationship between psychology and theology. How theology responses responds to psychological study of religion, or how theology evaluates psychological approaches to religion. Uh, of course, all times, we could say that the relationship between theology and psychology is not a happy relationship. There is always a tension between two fields. The reason is that psychology, the basic claim of psychology is becoming an empirical science like physics. In order to be science, psychology departed from philosophy and theology because psychology claims that as long as psychology remained as a branch of philosophy and theology, it will never be a science. It was just it was just a speculative branch of theology and philosophy. So psychology always has negative approaches, evaluations, and attitudes towards philosophy as well as uh, uh, theology. But at the end of the day, religion, religiosity, is one of the most important dimension of human experience. Psychology is about the study of human experience. So psychology has no luxury to ignore human religious experience. In order to study religious experience psychologically, the discipline of psychology of religion has been formed. But psychology of religion is not about religion. As a matter of fact, psychology of religion, it is about human religiosity and spirituality. In other words, psychology of religion, it is about religious experience. So, psychology intend to study uh, religious phenomena scientifically and empirically. In order to conduct a psychological study of religion, various quantitative and qualitative approaches have been utilized by various psychologists. Of course, there are many psychologists who really uh, interested who are really interested in religious experience. For example, William James probably is the most important one. He wrote a very important book. The title of the book is The Varieties of Religious Experience. The subtitle of the book, A Study in Human Nature. Of course, William James delivered this lecture as a Gifford lecture in Edinburgh University, and then this lecture formed under the title of The Varieties of Religious Experience. And after that, his student from Harvard University, Edwin Starbuck, he is the first one who wrote a book under the title of Psychology of Religion. So Edwin Starbuck is the one who wrote the first book about psychology, religious phenomena under the title of psychology of religion. And then again, he is also one of the students of William James, James Pratt, who wrote a very important works in the field of psychology of religion under the title of religious consciousness. And then Albert Coe wrote another book, again under the name of Psychology of Religion. And the founder of Clark University, Stanley Hall, wrote a very important work, again under it's about Stanley Hall's book is about psychological study of Jesus, the life of Jesus. The title of his book, Jesus in the Light of Psychology. This is a very important study of Stanley Hall. And then there are some other important studies. Basically, we have to remember that Freud wrote a very important works actually about psychology of religion. His works, he wrote 3 main books. The first one is The Future of Illusion. The second one is Moses and Monotheism. The third one is Totem and Taboos. And all these 3 books create a lot of controversy and discussion about the relationship between psychology and religion. So the other important psychologist who really deals with religious phenomena seriously is Carl Gustav Jung. He delivered lectures in Yale University as under the title of Psychology and Religion. And he also wrote a very long essay about psychological meaning of Trinity. He also wrote a book called Answer to Job. This book created a lot of discussion and debate when it was published, but probably Jung is the most important psychologist who has a sympathetic and positive approach towards religion, and he considers religion as a sort of psychotherapeutic system, and he tries to provide a sort of archetypal interpretation of religious experience. And another important psychologist is Gordon Allport. He wrote a very important work in the field of psychology of religion. The title of the book, Individual and His Religion. He basically tried to interpret how human religiosity developed from childhood until elderly period. So that means that religion is always an important subject for psychologists. Psychology of religion today is one of the most important areas of psychology. So the question in this regard is this: how theology responds psychology of religion, or how theology evaluates psychological study of religion. Of course, when we talk about religion, all religions, they are basically interested in their foundations, theological foundations. They are trying to interpret or promote their faith principle for their followers. In Christian theology, Karl Barth wrote a very important work, his work called Church Dogmatic. For example, he interprets the foundational principles of Christian faiths for Christian institutions like church, or for clergy, and for Christians. Theologians basically, fundamentally, focused on the theological foundation and principles of religions. Most of the times, theology ignores the experiential side or dimension of religions. Therefore, most of the time, theologians are reluctant to look at the psychological dimension of religious experience. For them, the dogmatic and theological dimension is essential and more important than experiential and psychological dimension of religiosity. So, when psychology of religion developed, when psychological studies about religious phenomena produced, theologians realized that it is important to know and to get benefit from these psychological studies, because they start to change their view. They say that so far we focused on the Word of God, we focused on religious scriptures, religious dogmas, institutional religions, and so on. Yes, we we have to. I mean, as a theologian, they say that it is important for us to study the Word of God, revelation, religious texts, dogmas, foundations, and so on. But at the same time, we have to look at the human experience itself. So, of course, there are people uh, simply uh, they say religion and psychology they are two different areas. They can't be together. Uh, we simply rejected them. We are just going to focus religious texts, religious foundations. Psychology is simply is irrelevant. I mean, of course, this approach has a sort of negative approach to psychological study of religion. But on the other hand, there are some theologians like Paul Tillich, like Don Browning, like Reinhold Niebuhr. These Christian theologians, they think that uh, they should uh, look at human experience. There must be a sort of dialogical relations between theology and psychology. So, at least psychological study of religion change the mind setting of many theologians. Many theologians, especially in Western tradition, in Western theology, they start to study the works of Jung, the works of Freud, and other many psychologists, especially humanist psychology, the movements of humanist psychology. Many theologians have a lot of sympathy for this humanistic psychological school. So, my point is that theologian responses to psychology is not a singular one. Some theologians have positive approaches, the other have negative approaches. So some they say psychology and theology can go side by side, but some they say psychology and theology they are totally different fields and they can't exist at the same time at the same place together. I mean, this mixed feeling, let's put it in this way, these mixed thoughts, I think exist in psychological in the side of psychologists as well. Many psychologists they could say that theology cannot be studied scientifically. Psychology is a scientific subject. Therefore, psychology has no interest or theological subject are not suitable scientific subject for psychology, and they could adopt a sort of a rejected attitude toward religion. Uh, In order to establish a sort of dialogical, a constructive and creative approach or relations between psychology and religion or theology, probably both area, both psychology and theology, must understand that theology, it is about human experience. It is not about the divinity. It is about how divinity or theo experienced or manifested in human experience. So, in order to theology, as long as theology grounded itself on human experience, it is meaningful. It could say something meaningful. It could get benefit from psychological approaches. But if they say theology is a sacred field, it's not about human experience, and so on, I don't think this way of argument could create a sort of fruitful relation between these two fields. So, the main question for psychology and theology is the matter of correlation, the matter of relation. How can they relate two disciplines with each other? I think if theology wants to relate religious ideas to modern human situation, it must start with human experience, with human conditions. So if human experience, human condition become the starting point of theology, in this regard, psychology could help theology about a better, profound, and fruitful understanding of human condition. Of course, one of the main obstacle between theology and psychology is the claim of secularism. Many theologians, they say that psychology is a secular discipline. It has nothing to do with religious questions. It has a negative approach to religion. Furthermore, psychology itself, as a secular discipline, could harm religion. So, I think locating psychology as a pure secular discipline is not a healthy approach. Psychology, yes, it is an empirical science, but it is not a pure science which follows the ideology of secularism. Psychology basically try to study uh, human experience, human behavior, human thought, human feelings, human attitudes in an empirical matter. So, locating psychology in the side of secularism is not a healthy approach. Of course, the other important issue is uh, psychology. Some theologian could say that uh, theology is about ultimate questions of human life. Uh, what is the meaning of life? What will happen after that? What is the origin of human life? This sort of universal, perennial questions are the subject of theology. And human being, it is not just uh, a bodily creature, it has a transcendent dimensions. I mean, it has a spiritual dimension. Uh, so theology is about this transcendental dimension of human person. Uh, I think this theology and psychology, they say that psychology is not interested in this transcendental dimension of human personality. But for example, humanistic psychology, transpersonal psychology, they are very sympathetic uh, this theological idea that human individual has self-transcendental dimension. So I think there could be, it is possible to make or produce psychological explanation as well as theological explanations which which interpret immanent and transcendental dimension of human experience together. So in this regard, there could be a sort of more fruitful sharing between theology and between transpersonal psychology and humanistic psychology. Of course, many theologians, when they talk about psychology, basically they talk about psychoanalysis. And most psychologists, uh, they, they are interested Freud's idea regarding uh, religion. Uh, but uh, most of them, most theologians, construct Freud as the enemy of religion. I think maybe, yes, it is clear that Freud is making a very radical criticism of religion. There is no doubt about that. But at the same time, Freud shows or help us to see how religion rooted or grounded in human unconscious. So maybe it is possible to make a sort of a new way of looking at Freud, who shows another dimension of human religiosity. So theology probably needs to read Freud's idea through fresh eyes. Of course, in this regard, theologians, they are not happy about depicting all religious experience as a sort of neuroticism, as a pathology. They say that, yes, there are some pathological dimension of religiosity, but all human religiosity cannot be reduced to pathology or neuroticism. So I think this response come from theological sides can be understood by psychologists more constructive way. And psychologists also must be careful not to make their claims by saying that all religion is pathology, like Freud do. So I think or theologians similarly, psychologists also could say that theologians makes religious experience as the totality of human experience. Religious experience is not the totality of human experience, it is just one dimension of human experience. So I think psychology and theology, they must restrain themselves when they make claims about each other. So if both sides accept their limitations, if they accept if they become or they behave in humility, if they show more humility, I think both sides, they could learn a lot from each other. So the point is here, making psychology the foundation of everything. I'm saying psychology interpret everything about human experience, which is psychologism. On the other hand, saying theology is the final word about human experience. So whatever theology said It is the real final interpretation of human experience. So this is also theologism. So I think there is a tension between theologism, and psychologism. So both psychologists and theologians, they must be careful not to make their field an ism. They must they have they must do everything to study theology, psychology, but the point is that they must avoid being trapped by psychologism or theologism. So, the final point I would like to make, the question of freedom. For example, psychoanalysis fundamentally claims that human personality has been shaped by biological factors, or behaviorists claim that human behavior is the result of stimulus response. So I think both theologian could say that both theory, they don't accept human individual as free being. So they theological approaches argues that freedom is essential part of human nature. Human being is free because this comes from his original creation or his original nature. Human nature requires human being to be free. Of course, there are some other approaches in psychology, like humanistic psychology. They focused on the uniqueness of human individual, human freedom. So, yes, there could be some psychological theory who have negative approaches regarding human freedom, but this does not mean that theology and psychology must cut their relations with each other. Although they keep their differences or they express their differences, they must keep dialogue. They must keep sharing their ideas, their research, their interpretation with each other in order to enrich each other mutually, constructively, and creatively. Thank you.